To the Freedom Founder podcast. I'm your host, Zach Duggar. Now, you have perhaps thought about starting your own business, or maybe you were thinking about doing something in the entrepreneurial on a side hustle basis. My guest today has great experience from early on in his youth when he stepped up into leadership role and then eventually took over the company that he was working for. So I want to welcome Colin today to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zach.
Well, Colin, I want to start with that conversation. When we talk to people, sometimes it's, later in life kind of thing where it's you get to a point in your career and you decide I'm going to get into something that's my own. But from talking with you before, that's not how it worked for you. You kind of started at an early age in this process. But let's go back even before that, though, because sometimes a lot of time people think it takes a genius to start a business, and that's not necessarily your story.
Yeah, that's right. To your point, I guess the beginning for me, I actually, believe it or not, read a magazine article that inspired me to become an entrepreneur. And from that moment forward, and it wasn't about, to your point, somebody being a genius or having everything figured out. It was as simple as somebody who took life into their own hands. And,
Yeah.
For me, as somebody who up to that point, I kind of struggled in high school. I wasn't focused. I didn't do well. Now looking back, it's kind of a classic entrepreneurial story. But at the time, I just felt like this, kind of a misfit. And my dream had been to go away to college, but I kind of messed that chance up. And so I just felt aimless and kind of drifting through life. And so I read this magazine article about a guy who took life into his own hands and made some amazing things out of it. And it hit me like a thunderbolt. I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is the path for me to kind of fix where I'm at and get to where I want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So for you, what was the move for you in regards to taking life in your own hands and starting to learn more about being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a humble pie right out of the gate. So one of the first things I did was I kind of surveyed the people I knew, and there was only really one person I knew who had a small business, and I realized I'm going to have to go try and ask for a job there. It was a family member. I had had a sibling that had worked in a family business, and I was really trying to avoid that. That was not my plan or my goal. And it was really just admitting that, hey, I can fast track this if I can see behind the scenes, like what is happening in a small business. And so I went and did that. I went and, got a job there, said, hey, I'll do whatever job you need. I'm willing to work hard, willing to, figure this out. And so that was where I started. And then the minute I was in the business, as happens in small business, you wear a bunch of hats. And I just kind of started gravitating more and more toward the business, the finance side, the numbers. And, that was what really, I always considered that the beginning of my career.
So you didn't have a business degree or necessarily a business background, but hands-on learning experience with jumping right in and starting to gravitate towards those areas that naturally seem to be your inclination, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I would say, no matter where you're at in that journey, and I think, I've never talked to an entrepreneur who wouldn't love to find a, generally young person or inexperienced person in that way, who's willing to do any task you ask, really approach it like they're an owner, even when they're not, and really just go after what needs to be done and be passionate about it. That's not the experience we have with the vast majority of employees that we take on. And so It's a great way to, build up your career. And I looked at it, now looking back, and I've heard this advice. I didn't know it at the time, but I think I instinctively kind of got it, was that era of my career was about learning and opportunity to gain experience, not opportunity for a title, for money, for any of the other stuff that, a lot of times in a normal career path, people get caught up on. Yeah. All I wanted was exposure and experience. And man, I got that in spades.
Yeah. I mean, jumping right in and being willing to do whatever tasks were being requested of you. And if it's a smaller business, then usually it requires multiple hats and being willing to take on multiple different roles, and sometimes doing the little things, the things that for some people, like you said, there are employees sometimes that'll come into a business with that perspective of, I don't do that task, that's beneath me. Whereas when you're the entrepreneur or the owner with that mindset, nothing's beneath you. It just needs to get done. So you're willing to
Yeah.
do the job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you. So 22 years later, I own that company, right? But day one, I cleaned out a closet. No joke.
Yeah.
Day one was, hey, there's a closet back there. This is a task that requires no training, so the new guy can take it on. And but I cleaned that closet like it was going to be my masterpiece. You know, I mean, by the time I took 100% of the stuff out of the closet, put in some shelving, labeled the shelving, put everything back in, thought about, asked everybody in the company where, what they needed access to, what they didn't, what stuff that I had pulled out was just full on junk. Right. So I kind of cleaned it and then reorganized it. And I took extreme pride in that. And I think it set the tone. Everybody went, wow, okay. We know this guy came to work here because he's got a family member here, but that's not, loafing it, kind of taking it easy type of work. Just the way I approach the closet. And so, I love that. I think to your point, you make everything you do your masterpiece, take that attitude, especially when you're new, especially when you've got a lot to prove, and people will take notice. People will absolutely take notice.
Definitely. Yeah. Be willing and do the work and do it your best, not just halfway. And so as you got to that point where you were starting to gravitate towards the finances, the business side, what was your time frame from when you started to when you got into more of a leadership role?
Yeah, so it was in the first year to 15 months. We were just struggling as a business from a financial perspective. I didn't know all the details at that point, but I knew that it wasn't right. Yeah. And so as I had earned the trust and the willingness to, like we said, jump in and do anything. And I didn't do well in school. I was kind of a classic kind of troublemaker and bad student, but I always did well on, the standardized math tests and that sort of thing. Math just made sense to me. The kind of raw, impact of numbers always resonated really well with me. And so, I knew that I knew nothing about the financial side of business, but I knew I would learn it and I would figure it out. And so, the minute I stepped up, I mean, we really, and that's the other thing I would say, the next level, you were talking about being willing. I think having that willing mindset, willing heart, say it when you're ready to step up, be willing to say it. And so there was a moment where something really, kind of an unfortunate incident had happened, a financial hit to the company. The person who was supposed to be in charge of it had missed it, had just kind of whiffed on it. And I said, I could do better than that. And I was 23 years old. I didn't know anything about the financial side of the business, but I knew that I would get in there and within months, not years, I would be better than the person we had. And it might've been weeks, the pace I hit. And so that was it. Right. And so that's just the way the approach I take to anything new I learn. And that served me well.
Yeah. Be willing to do the work, then be willing to step up and put your hand in the air when there's a need for something greater and a task that's bigger than you and your current, what you believe is your potential, current capacity, and what you're doing now, and growth into something new. Yeah. So as you took over in the finance side, within a few years, you were running the company, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So that was about a year, let's say a year, it's 15 months in, and 5 years after I started, I took over as CEO. But there was probably the last couple of those years I wasn't CEO that I was kind of the CEO because, I was in effect taking over the business and really, having to argue my way into the solutions that I was advocating for. And so that was what set the stage for me taking over. And, and again, I was young. I was 26 years old when I took over the company, and but I was confident. I was confident because even at that point, I had a track record, just like the financial piece of saying like, hey, I don't know about this, but I know there's resources out in the world that I can go leverage to get smarter, and nobody's going to outwork me. Nobody's going to outlearn me. And so I'm starting with some massive limitations, but I'll get those addressed pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of business, what is this?
So it's a manufacturing company. So we sell airport conveyor systems. So like when you go to the airport, claim your bag, we make those. So it's one of those weird products that everyone's experienced and knows, but nobody's ever thought about. Right. And so, we manufacture those still to this day. And like I said, that was my first company.
Yeah. So starting at 22, around that age, taking over as CEO at 26. And then I believe you said 13 years after you'd started is when you became the owner of the business. Is that correct?
Well, so I started, let me think here. Back in 2005,
Uh-huh.
became a partial owner. I bought a minority
Okay.
stake. I
Yep.
bought some more in 2009, let's say, and then 2013, I bought the rest. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
a little bit of
officially,
a path.
absolutely. Absolutely. But that's not where you stopped. The journey sometimes for people is that one business that they build and grow and they stay with. But that isn't where you stopped. You became an investor in other businesses as well. And so you're on that serial entrepreneur pathway. You continued. So where did that lead you next? Or how did that occur within that mindset of, okay, now this is going well, I want to actually do something else additionally?
Yeah. So I don't know. I had someone in my life very early on when I would say when I was probably 24, 25 that I met
Uh,
who owned multiple businesses, but didn't work at any of them.
mm,
And that really created a template for me because I went to work for this company thinking it was going to be for a year, thinking I was going to leave and go do my own thing. Had no passion about the product to speak of. I'm not a particularly mechanical guy, technical. I'm not an engineer. And so I didn't have this like passion for the product the way that
mhm,
most entrepreneurs do. It forced me to become kind of a technical business owner, somebody who just likes business for business sake.
mhm.
And then obviously as I gravitated toward the financial piece, that applies to basically any business. And so really where, I had this idea all along, I had to go through a long journey of turning around that company, fixing it,
Mhm.
getting it above water to the point I actually had money to invest. But along the way, I always had this vision that I was going to own multiple businesses. It's just that it's part of what I really enjoy is kind of being able to have a diversified way I spend my time, be able to look
Yep.
at different businesses, be involved. And so when I got to the point I was ready to invest, I actually had a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur who needed help in his business. And he was on a similar journey that I had already been on and felt like I could give him some really relevant advice. And we ended up kind of working together as friends and then ultimately became business partners. And then I later bought another business, now have founded my own business. So it's just
Okay.
kind of kept going. Always one
Yeah,
more thing.
absolutely. And so are you running all of those three companies and your startup, or what's the status now?
No, so that's a great question. So about 5 years ago, I met a guy who's now the CEO of my first company.
Okay.
He's CEO of two of our companies because the third one that I bought was really more of a kind of a sister company to the first one.
Hmm.
So he's in charge of both of those. He's my business partner on that deal for both of those companies. And a big secret for me is I've got to have a CEO or someone who really can run the business day to day.
Yeah.
That's the only way that my model makes any sense. I can't, when I hear people, you see famous people, Jack Dorsey or somebody who's like, "Oh, I'm CEO
Mhm.
of two companies." Like, yeah, I don't totally buy that.
Mhm.
It's not realistic. You're not in a business all day, every day.
Yeah.
Then you're not really the heartbeat of that business. And to me, running a business, being the kind of normal view of the CEO, is you're kind of that heartbeat of the business. So I'm
Mhm.
doing that for my startup, but my other three businesses have other CEOs that are still running them.
Yeah. So that template, that model that you saw with that individual when you were in your mid-20s is something now you're actually seeing being carried out as you continue to move forward and
Yep.
move into the startup. So tell us a little bit about the startup. What kind of services do you provide or products do you provide? What are you doing?
Well, I'll tell you first. So the startup, I'm in it as CEO today.
Yep.
That's the reality of starting a business, and it has,
Mhm.
is different than just buying an
Yeah.
existing one. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. So we're profitability consultants. What we do is help companies make more money, to put it really
Okay.
simply. So I would say that we're kind of a subset of the fractional CFO space. But the limitation that I've seen is most people will have a bookkeeper either in the business or outside the
Mhm.
business. That person is just doing the day to day, categorizing credit cards, that
Yep.
sort of thing. Then maybe you have a CPA. If you have a banner year, that CPA, the really good ones, will help you save some of that money and not pay it all in taxes.
Mhm.
Fantastic. But at best they're saying, hey, there's this area over here is something you should look at. You can maybe make more money, or, based on other business I've seen, check this out. But that's not something that the average business owner has the time or interest or expertise to do. Yep. And so the knock that I have on kind of the classic fractional CFO approach is that small businesses, and I'd say, from $500,000 in revenue up to 10 to 20 million in revenue, you don't need a more sophisticated plan. This isn't, unless you're selling or doing acquisition, unless you're going through some sort of a massive restructuring, recapitalization or something, you don't need a CFO level person in your business just firing plans at you. Mm-hmm. That's not the solution for you. What you really need is you need the discipline that's involved in making more money, which is grinding out a slightly higher margin than you had last year. It's figuring out how to push more toward premium pricing than where you were previously. So it's doing the little things within the business that have a compound effect. And so that's really what we help companies with, is we get in there and, we have a dashboard that tells them where they're at. We have, I sit down with every business owner. I want to understand what their goals are, because I need to know, like, is the goal just to, hey, make more money? Is the goal to get this thing to where you can sell it in 3 to 5 years? Yeah. That's going to dictate the path that we take. And so once I have, a good feel for where you're at, and I have understanding of what your goal is, then we have a playbook that we run, and our team is trained to help run this playbook within your business. That's going to really put you on a path to much more profitability than you've experienced before, because you probably have sales expertise, you probably have product expertise, but if you don't have the financial expertise, mm-hmm. you got a kind of a leaky boat that one person can only plug so many holes.
Right. Wow, that absolutely would be a helpful support for many businesses. I can see that without a shadow of a doubt, because there are a lot of people who start businesses because of that passion for the product or the service. And it's not, like you said, things you had to learn along the way. There are people who they're just working that product, that service, but they're not literally able to dedicate the time they would really need to get on that path towards increased profitability. So to have someone come alongside and actually guide and support that, and to create that visual, the dashboards to help someone see it, that's impressive. I think that would be a great support. So in regards to that, tell me a little bit more about the dashboards. Like, what are people getting when they're really engaged with working with your company?
Yeah. So the dashboard is what we call the Fin score. And the Fin score is, I take it back to, hey, when I was a student, I was just describing myself in high school. I didn't love report card day, but everybody understood report card day, right? Everybody knew that a 92 is a heck of a lot better than a 76, right? Yep. And so what we've done is the Fin score is kind of a report card for your business. It really talks about the levers of profitability. And so what that allows us to do is very quickly, you don't have to be an expert at the P&L. A lot of business owners, they look at their P&L and it's like, there's big numbers, little numbers. They're kind of bouncing around. They start, bouncing around and kind of get lost in the sauce. And they know if it's got a positive number at the bottom, but a lot of times how it arrives there, or why it was better or worse than last month or last year, they get lost. So the Fin scores are a report card. It gives them a really simple understanding. And then with that report card, we can then look at the trend lines and so we're looking at, kind of like when you get that report card at the end of the year, let's say you had 6 different grading periods, you got 6 different data points for how you did in English, right? So I know, like, I started the year strong and then it got weak and then I got it back on track. So similarly, we can monitor kind of what's happening within the profitability levers. And then our goal is to spend the bulk of our time helping pull those levers, figure out what are the things that are going to get English back on track, or whatever the number is that we're focused on. And so what that also does is that when we meet at least once a month, which we like to have a structured meeting once a month, and then we have additional meetings throughout the month based on the needs of the client. But that structured meeting, we also want to invite the team. So the first half of it is your leadership team in addition to you. And what we found is giving a report card version, again, you may or may not expose all your numbers to your team, but the report card is something everybody's comfortable sharing. Yep. With the report card in view, we can talk with the team about what it would take to actually improve those numbers. And so now your team is starting to elevate. Your knowledge is starting to elevate. We're starting to address any of those gaps in awareness. And that ultimately, whether your goal is to take a 6-week sabbatical and go on an amazing vacation with your family, or it's to get the business to a position where you can work there 2 days a week or just run it remotely. We're elevating the team to be able to help, run the business that actually sustains profit as you grow, but even unlocks new levels of profit as you grow.
Yeah, there's some of those elements that are not always shared by the owner, but if you can put it in terms that people are comfortable with sharing, and that allows the leadership team to understand their actions do make a difference and their engagement does make a difference in the day-to-day operations, not just the operations, but on the financial health and profitability of the company. I mean, I imagine that increases their commitment to be able to see how they can be such a big part of this company.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one other thing I'll add, one of our common places we like to start is what I call common size. And so you can look up common sizes out there, but it basically means, the way I'm referring to it is, I want to find a unit of measure in your business that we can compare everything to. So we have some clients, it's a project, or like one of my businesses, we look at a per cabinet basis. So I own a cabinet manufacturing company with a partner of mine who runs it. And, in that business, it's like, I want to break everything we do down to a cabinet, right? So what's revenue per cabinet? What's labor per cabinet? What is our sales and marketing cost per cabinet? What's our overhead per cabinet? And what that does is it allows me to then go back into the sales process. I can take it, every different level of the business can be compared on that per cabinet basis. And that's really powerful because everyone in the business knows how many cabinets we're making. But to your point, not everybody knows what revenue we're doing. Not everybody knows what kind of profit we have or how much labor cost is. So if I kind of tie it to the story that everyone already knows, then when we're talking about, a new potential client, a prospect, it's not just like, hey, there's a new home builder out there, we should go land them. It's like, how many cabinets we think they're going to build a year. So we start to kind of talk in this one comment. We create this Rosetta Stone that translates all the way across the business. And to your point, it enables even frontline employees to know, like, thumbs up, thumbs sideways, or thumbs down, like, how's the business going?
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. So when did you get started with this? And then how would you say things are going? Do you have a lot of business clients? How's that interest been?
Yeah. So to your point, I think the interest has been really high. So we've been going for about a year. I've been for much longer than that, been doing this, essentially this service for my own businesses. And that's really where this sprang from, was through PPP and a lot of the COVID stuff that was going on. A lot of business owners were running through that challenge and figuring out that whole gauntlet. And I was always like a resource for people, just knowing, the way I approach business. So I've been kind of on the side advising friends and helping be this kind of person for a lot of companies. And so the idea was, how can we do this as a real service and take it out there? And so, so we've grown pretty quickly, continuing to add, new clients. And, that's really what I'm excited about. I'm excited to turn these ideas, like with any business, you start out with, you have this kind of mental playbook that you can call upon. But what I love, and maybe this is part of my kind of nerding out from being in manufacturing, even though I'm not an engineer, not a production guy, but I love the thinking of business like a bit of like an assembly line, and kind of thinking through, like, what would the process need to be to make this where we can replicate results and make it effective and efficient. And so that's what we spend a ton of our time building out the product. And so now it's just, as we add new clients, we're doing it much more efficiently every time around.
Excellent. Now, if somebody does want to find out more about those services, what's the best way for them to connect with you or to get more information?
Yeah, so you can either reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's Colin Sanburg on LinkedIn. And then you can also look up our website. So it's FinElevate.com. I'm sure you'll have that in the show notes. But yeah, look us up there. You'll see we're talking a lot about profit and helping people grow their profit. And so if you look us up and reach out and tell me where you heard of me, and we'll make it happen. And hey, even if, I always tell people, look, I love other entrepreneurs. I'm in a bunch of mastermind groups and have a ton of entrepreneur friends. Let's talk, whether you think you're a client or not. I'm always happy to throw some good advice at you. And if that's it, then that's it. And we'll be friends, and that'll be all good.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no harm in making that call, making that contact and reaching out. I think sometimes people get concerned or afraid to reach out because they think then they're committed, but really you don't gain anything without making that initial step. So
Yeah, and being an entrepreneur can be kind of lonely. So,
yeah.
it's nice to build out that network. And I just, to me, sometimes I reach out to people and I say right out of the gate, hey, I don't think I'm a fit for you. I
Yeah.
wanted some advice, or hey, I just want to pick your brain about something. And people love that.
Oh yeah.
That's great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now I want to ask one other question that I like to ask all my guests. If you were to be handed $1 million today, no restrictions attached to that, how would you invest that in your businesses or otherwise, and why?
So I'll tell you, one of my big passions is about the business model. So
Mhm.
I tell this for all of my clients. I know this from the heartache from experience. If I would invest that money in something that was recurring revenue, I would invest that in something that had, credit card on file, I like to call it.
Mhm.
I prefer an ACH, but in
Yep.
a business that, what I like to describe it is those things, it's like fighting with gravity versus fighting against gravity for the life of the business. And so
Yeah.
every business has a bit of a range. So that's not entirely realistic for every business, but you should be pushing toward the best version of the business model, the best
Yep.
labor efficiency, the best ability to kind of, perfect clarity on your sales and marketing costs and like what the value that's returning. And so that would be it for me. Is that's the
Mhm.
way I look at the best businesses that are out there, it doesn't mean I don't help businesses. I don't work with businesses that don't
Yep.
fit that description. I do. My first business is the opposite of that.
Sure.
But if we're talking about where I'm going to put my money, where I'm going to bet, it's like I want to bet when we get to play with gravity on our side every day.
Yeah. Absolutely. Love that answer. Well, Colin, I want to thank you for joining us on the show today. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you and to find out more about your journey. I'm excited to see where this takes you next and all the different businesses you're going to help along the way.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Zach. Appreciate it.
Of course.